My 7-year-old daughter was fighting for her life in ICU, but when I called my mother begging her to come, she told me she couldn't miss her elite Vantage Yacht Club bridge tournament. My mom literally said, "Don't be so dramatic, children get sick all the time. I'm not ruining my social glow for a fever." She thought she was the sovereign of our family, holding her inheritance over my head like a surgical strike. But she made one fatal mistake. She forgot that I'm the architect who manages her secret offshore trust. While she was sipping champagne on that yacht, I didn't cry. I didn't beg again. I just sat in that hospital chair and executed a permanent foreclosure on her entire bank account. When her card gets declined for her executive package, membership 3 minutes from now, she's going to find out what it really feels like to be abandoned in a medical shock you can't afford to fix. The sterile glow of the hospital's pediatric ICU was a mirror paradox to the warm neon lights of the Diamond Bay Yacht Club, where my mother was currently holding court. I stood by the glass partition, watching my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, struggle against the medical shock of a sudden aggressive pneumonia. The rhythmic beep of the monitors was the only resolution in the room, a mechanical heartbeat that felt like a countdown. My hands trembled as I dialed my mother's number for the 10th time, praying for a surgical strike of maternal empathy that I had rarely seen in my 30 years. When she finally picked up, the background noise was a cacophony of clinking crystal and laughter, the sound of powerful bosses enjoying an executive package evening. "Mom, please," I whispered, my voice a ghost of its former strength. Lily's fever spiked to 104. Doctors are worried about respiratory failure. "I'm alone here. I need you to come. Just for an hour." There was a pause, followed by a long, dramatic sigh that carried the weight of a permanent foreclosure on my hopes. "Oh, Claire, don't be so dramatic," my mother replied, her tone a sovereign dismissal. "Children get fevers all the time. It's part of the janitor work of being a parent. I'm currently at the Elite Vantage Bridge tournament. I'm the architect of this year's charity drive, and I cannot simply walk away from my status in this room because you're having a panic attack." The medical shock of her words hit me harder than the cold hospital air. "A panic attack? Mom, she's in the ICU. She's your only granddaughter. How can you choose a vantage point at a card game over her life?" "I am choosing my legacy, Claire," she snapped, her social mask tightening even over the phone. "If I leave now, it looks like I don't have control. It ruins the glow of the evening. Besides, what could I possibly do? I'm not a doctor. I'd just be sitting in a hallway chair. You chose this executive package of a life when you decided to be a single mother. Deal with it." The line went dead, leaving me in a mirror paradox of grief and absolute white-hot fury. She thought she was the sovereign of our family because she controlled the ghost ledger of my late father's estate. She treated me like a janitor who was lucky to be allowed in her orbit, unaware that the very Vantage she was so proud of was built on a foundation I had secretly reinforced. She didn't know that 3 years ago, when the estate was facing a permanent foreclosure due to her executive package, spending habits, I had stepped in as the anonymous architect of a debt restructuring firm. I had saved her glow without her ever knowing, placing her fortune into a trust that I, the ghost, in the family, secretly managed. I looked back at Lily, whose small hand was lost in the medical shock of tubes and sensors. The resolution I felt in that moment was a surgical strike against my own hesitation. If my mother wanted to play the powerful boss at her yacht club while her granddaughter fought for a ghost of a breath, then she would have to learn what it felt like when the architect stopped building her pedestal. I pulled out my laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting the sovereign coldness in my eyes. I logged into the primary trust portal, the executive package that funded her bridge tournaments, her yacht fees, and her elite Vantage lifestyle. "You want to talk about status, Mom?" I whispered to the empty hallway, my fingers flying across the keys in a surgical strike of digital execution. "Let's see how much status you have when your mirror paradox finally shatters." With a single click, I triggered a permanent foreclosure on her access to all liquid assets. I didn't stop there. I initiated a status flip on her credit lines, marking every card as suspended due to fraudulent lifestyle. As I sat back in the hard plastic chair, the medical shock of my daughter's situation was still there, but it was now joined by a sovereign sense of justice. My mother was about to find out that When you treat your family like janitors, the architect eventually decides to close the building. The silence of the ICU was shattered 40 minutes later by the violent vibration of my phone against the cold metal tray. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. The medical shock of my digital surgical strike had clearly reached the Diamond Bay Yacht Club. I stepped away from Lily's bedside, watching the ghost of her breath fogging the oxygen mask one last time before answering the call. "Claire, what on earth have you done?" My mother's voice shrieked, the sovereign composure she prized so highly, now replaced by raw, unbridled panic. In the background, I could hear the hushed, judgmental whispers of the powerful bosses she had been trying to impress. The glow of her evening had clearly turned into a public, permanent foreclosure on her dignity. I am standing at the bar, and my executive package black card was just declined, she hissed, her voice a surgical strike of embarrassment. In front of the Commodore, in front of the entire committee. The server looked at me like I was a ghost with no credit. They said there was a status flip on my account and that I needed to contact the architect of the trust immediately. Fix this right now. I leaned against the sterile wall, a mirror paradox of a smile touching my lips as I pictured her standing there, her social mask shattered in front of the city's elite. The architect is currently busy watching a 7-year-old fight for her life. Mom, maybe you should try paying with your elite Vantage bridge trophies. Don't you dare use that tone with me, she roared, the medical shock of her financial permanent foreclosure, making her lose all sense of status. That money is my legacy. It's my vantage point in this city. You're just a ghost managing the paperwork. You have no right to trigger a status flip on my life while I'm in the middle of a tournament. You told me not to be dramatic, remember? I replied, my voice dropping into a sovereign coldness that finally made her go silent. You said children get sick all the time and that Lily's medical shock. It wasn't worth ruining your glow. Well, cards get declined all the time. Mom, it's part of the janitor work of having a lifestyle you can't actually afford. Claire, I will disinherit you, she screamed, a surgical strike she had used to control me for a decade. I will put a permanent foreclosure on every cent you think you're getting. You'll be a ghost in this family. You can't disinherit the person who already owns the bank, Mom, I said, the resolution of my secret identity finally beginning to surface. You've spent 3 years treating me like a janitor, while I was the architect, keeping your executive package afloat. Every glow you've enjoyed, every vantage point you've bragged about was a mirror paradox I created to keep you from realizing you were already broke. The silence on the other end was absolute, a medical shock of realization that felt more satisfying than any apology. I could hear her sharp, shallow breathing, the sound of a powerful boss, realizing she was actually a ghost in her own empire. What are you talking about? She whispered, the sovereign weight of her voice completely gone. The surgical strike has already been executed, I said, looking through the glass at Lily, who was finally starting to settle into a deeper, safer sleep. The yacht club membership, the executive package accounts, even the title to the house, they aren't in your name. They belong to the Ether Group, and as the architect of that group, I've decided that your status has been revoked for gross family negligence. Claire, please, she whimpered, her social mask now a puddle of desperation. The Commodore is watching. Everyone is looking at me. They think I'm a fraud. That's because you are, Mom, I replied, a surgical strike of truth to end the conversation. You chose the glow of a card, game over the medical, shock of your granddaughter. Now you can enjoy your status in the hallway of the club, because you aren't coming back into my sovereign circle until I say so. I ended the call, the resolution of the status flip, leaving me more centered than I had been in years. The janitor was done cleaning up her messes. The architect was now in full control of the glow. The medical shock of the ICU had transitioned into a heavy, watchful silence by the time the elevator doors at the end of the hall hissed open. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The frantic, rhythmic clicking of designer heels against the sterile linoleum was a surgical strike against the quiet of the ward. My mother marched toward me, her social mask completely dissolved into a mask of frantic rage. She was still wearing her elite Vantage silk wrap from the bridge tournament, but it was disheveled, a ghost of the glow she had been radiating only an hour ago. You dare humiliate me like that? She hissed as she reached the vantage point of the waiting area, her voice a low, vibrating resolution of fury. The Commodore had to pay for my table's champagne, Claire. I was escorted to the hallway by the manager as if I were some common janitor who couldn't pay her tab. Undo the permanent foreclosure on my accounts this instant. I didn't stand up. I stayed in the hard plastic chair, my eyes fixed on Lily through the glass, who was finally breathing without the medical shock of the ventilator. Keep your voice down, Mom, I said, my tone a sovereign command that made her stop mid-breath. This is a hospital, not your executive package yacht club. My daughter is sleeping. I don't care about the rules of this ghost of a building, she snapped, though her volume dropped slightly under my surgical strike of a gaze. You have committed a status flip that you cannot possibly sustain. I am the owner of the sterling fortune. I am the architect of our family's reputation. You are just the janitor. I allowed to manage the trust, because I didn't want to be bothered with the medical shock of taxes. I finally turned to look at her, the mirror paradox of our relationship coming into sharp focus. For years, she had looked down on me from her elite vantage, unaware that she was standing on a floor I had built. You really haven't looked at the ghost ledger in years, have you? I asked, pulling a thick executive package of legal documents from my bag. I slid them across the small table between us. You thought Dad left you a sovereign empire, but he left you a permanent foreclosure in a gold-plated box. By the time he died, the sterling name was a ghost. You were 6 months away from losing the glow of the estate and being tossed into the hallway of bankruptcy. She grabbed the papers, her hands trembling as she scanned the surgical strike of numbers. This can't be right. These are mirror paradox lies. The Ether Group bought the debt. They gave me a status extension. I am the Ether Group, Mom, I said, the resolution of the secret, finally breaking over her, like a cold wave of medical shock. I started it with the janitor wages I earned while you were busy telling me I'd never have your glow. I used my Vantage in the tech world to buy your debt through a ghost corporation. I didn't do it for you. I did it to ensure Lily would never have to experience the permanent foreclosure of her future. Because of your executive package, narcissism. My mother slumped into the chair opposite me, the medical shock of the status flip turning her face a ghostly white. You own the house? You own the yacht? I own the sovereign right to everything you think defines you, I replied, leaning forward into her space. For 3 years, I've let you keep the social mask of a powerful boss because I wanted my daughter to have a grandmother who was present. But tonight, you proved that even with all the glow in the world, your heart is still a ghost. Claire, I was confused. The executive package of the tournament was so stressful, she began, her voice a resolution of desperate backpedaling. Save it for the janitors you're about to be working with, I said, standing up with a surgical strike of finality. The status flip is permanent. As of this moment, the sovereign has decided that the elite Vantage lifestyle is over. You will be moving out of the estate by the end of the week. I've arranged a hallway apartment for you. It's modest, but it's more than the medical shock of the kindness you showed Lily tonight. The medical shock on her face was the only glow left in the room. She looked at me, realizing the mirror paradox had shifted forever. I wasn't her janitor anymore. I was the architect of her permanent foreclosure. But what will I tell my friends? She whispered, her social mask completely gone. Tell them you finally underwent a surgical strike of reality, I said, turning back toward Lily's room. The status flip is complete. You're no longer a powerful boss. Mom, you're just a ghost in a borrowed wrap. The medical shock of my revelation hadn't slowed my mother down. Instead, it had triggered a desperate, clawing attempt to regain her sovereign standing. By the next morning, as Lily finally drifted into a peaceful, natural sleep, my phone began to buzz, with a surgical strike of frantic messages from the rest of the family. My mother had clearly spent the night in the hospital hallway, not praying for her granddaughter, but launching a mirror paradox campaign to paint me as a powerful boss gone mad. I met them in the hospital cafeteria, a neutral vantage point far from Lily's room. My Uncle Marcus and Aunt Sylvia sat flanking my mother, their social masks tight with a mix of medical shock and indignation. They were the elite Vantage, members of the family who had always treated my single motherhood as a ghost, in their executive package lineage. "Claire, this status flip is absurd," Uncle Marcus began, his voice a surgical strike of manufactured authority. "Your mother says you've frozen her executive package, accounts, and threatened her with a permanent foreclosure on the family estate. You're acting like a janitor who found a master key and thinks she owns the building." I took a slow sip of my coffee, the glow of the morning sun through the cafeteria windows, highlighting the resolution in my eyes. "I don't just have the key, Marcus. I built the building." Aunt Sylvia let out a sharp, mocking laugh, a mirror paradox of my mother's earlier arrogance. "We've all seen your ghost of a career. You manage a small firm. We are the Sterlings. We have status. You cannot simply execute a permanent foreclosure on a family legacy because you're tired of being the janitor." "It's interesting you mentioned the sovereign legacy," I said, leaning forward until the medical shock on their faces deepened. I pulled a second ghost ledger from my bag. "Marcus, your elite Vantage vineyard in Napa? It's been in permanent foreclosure for 2 years. Sylvia, your executive package gallery in the city? It hasn't made a profit since 2022. You've both been living on mirror paradox credit, funded by a sovereign trust you thought was your birthright." The medical shock in the room was absolute. My mother looked from me to her siblings, her social mask crumbling as she realized she wasn't the only ghost in the room. "I am the ether group," I repeated, my voice a surgical strike that cut through their status. "I didn't just buy Mom's debt. I bought yours too. I've spent years being the janitor for this entire family's executive package delusions, quietly keeping the glow alive while you treated me like I was invisible. But when my mother chose a Vantage point at a bridge tournament over her granddaughter's life, the resolution became clear. The status flip isn't just for her, it's for all of you." Marcus's hand shook as he reached for the ledger, the medical shock of his financial permanent foreclosure finally sinking in. You're cutting us off? Over a hospital visit? "I'm cutting you off because you are ghosts who believe your glow gives you the right to be cruel," I said, standing up with a sovereign finality. "You treat people like janitors until you need them to fix your medical shock. Well, the architect is on strike. Every card, every car, every executive package, perk, consider them under permanent foreclosure by the end of the business day." As I walked away, the mirror paradox was complete. I was no longer the ghost mother in the hallway. I was the sovereign who had just dismantled a dynasty. The status flip was no longer a threat. It was their new reality. The medical shock of the cafeteria confrontation hadn't ended the war. It had only forced my family into a desperate surgical strike of legal retaliation. 2 days later, while Lily was finally moved to a regular room, her glow returning as she laughed at a cartoon, I was served with a resolution of a different kind. My mother, Marcus, and Sylvia had banded together, hiring a high-profile, powerful boss attorney to contest the permanent foreclosure on their trust access. They were suing the architect for financial elder abuse and malicious breach of fiduciary duty, still unaware that the ghost they were fighting was the person paying for the very lawyers they were trying to use. I met them in a glass-walled conference room downtown, a vantage point that overlooked the entire city. My mother sat at the head of the table, her social mask reinforced by the presence of her legal executive package. She looked at me with a sovereign disdain, as if I were still the janitor she could sweep out of her life. "This is your last chance for a resolution, Claire," her lawyer stated, his voice a surgical strike of manufactured intimidation. "Return the executive package, accounts to your mother's control, and drop this status flip crusade, or we will execute a permanent foreclosure on your reputation in the courts." I leaned back, the mirror paradox of the situation making me chuckle softly. "I find it interesting that you're threatening me with a surgical strike using funds that don't exist. What is she talking about?" Aunt Sylvia snapped, her glow of confidence wavering under the medical shock of my calmness. "I told you the Ether Group owns everything," I said, sliding a final ghost ledger across the table. "That includes the retainer you just tried to pay this firm. Since all Sterling-related assets are under permanent foreclosure for debt reconciliation, your check was flagged as a status flip violation by my compliance team 10 minutes ago." The lawyer looked at his phone, his sovereign expression instantly turning into a medical shock of professional embarrassment. The funds have been frozen, he whispered, looking at my mother like she was a ghost. I am the architect of this final settlement, I said, my voice rising with a sovereign authority that finally silenced the room. You wanted a vantage point over my life? Well, here is yours. You will sign these resolution papers. You will agree to a voluntary permanent foreclosure on your claims to the estate. In return, I will provide a janitor's allowance, a small, monthly stipend for modest living. No yacht clubs, no executive package tournaments, and no glow of the Sterling name. My mother's face twisted into a mirror paradox of grief and rage. You're making us ghosts in our own city. You made yourselves ghosts the night you chose a card game over your granddaughter's medical shock, I replied, my voice a final surgical strike. The status flip is done. You can either be janitors with a roof over your heads, or you can face the permanent foreclosure of a park bench. Sign the papers. One by one, they picked up the pens, the medical shock of their new reality settling over them like a shroud. The powerful bosses were gone. Only the ghosts of a broken legacy remained. I took the signed documents, the resolution of the Sterling War finally ending in a sovereign victory. The medical shock that had once paralyzed my life was now a distant ghost, replaced by the vibrant glow of Lily's laughter, echoing through our new home. 3 months had passed since the final settlement, and Lily had made a full recovery. Her strength a resolution that served as a daily reminder of why I had executed the surgical strike on my own family. I stood on the balcony of our new sovereign estate, not a Sterling property, but a vantage point I had built entirely on my own, watching her run across the grass. The status flip was now a permanent reality in our city. The Sterling name, once a sovereign symbol of executive package luxury, was now a ghost of a warning. Marcus and Sylvia had retreated to modest lives, their permanent foreclosure from high society complete. But for my mother, the medical shock of her new life was a daily mirror paradox she couldn't escape. I had allowed her one final visit, not to my home, but to a public park, a vantage point where she could see the life she had traded for a bridge tournament. She arrived wearing a ghost of her former designer wardrobe, the glow of her presence replaced by the weary look of a janitor who had finally realized the building was closed. She looks wonderful, Claire, my mother whispered, her voice a thin resolution of regret as she watched Lily play. I saw the photos of the Ether Group's new executive package gala in the papers. You looked like a sovereign out there. I was just doing the work, Mom, I said, my voice a surgical strike of calm. The architect doesn't build for the glow of the cameras. I build for the resolution of my daughter's safety. Something you never understood while you were chasing status. I've been evicted from the club, Claire, she said, the medical shock of her public fall still fresh in her eyes. The powerful bosses won't even look at me in the hallway of the grocery store. They treat me like I'm street garbage. I turned to face her, the mirror paradox finally coming full circle. That's the ultimate justice, isn't it? You called me street garbage because you thought your executive package lifestyle made you a sovereign. Now you know that without your ghost of a fortune, you're just a person who failed her family in a medical shock crisis. Status can be bought, Mom, but respect is the only permanent foreclosure you can't undo. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. A surgical strike of boundaries. The janitor stipend will continue, as long as you stay away from our vantage point. Lily doesn't need to grow up in the mirror paradox of your vanity. She deserves the glow of the truth. As I called Lily over, her glow was so bright it seemed to push the ghosts of our past further into the shadows. My mother stood alone on the park bench, a janitor of her own regrets, watching the sovereign family she had tried to destroy walk away into a future she would never be part of. The status flip was no longer a war. It was the resolution of a new life. The architect had finished the build, and the ultimate justice was the peace we finally found in the light.